So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Rishi Sunak throwing Boris Johnson under the bus for delaying the second lockdown, which I find is hilarious that he's doing this so brazenly. So here we can see Rishi Sunak confirmed he opposed the September circuit breaker COVID lockdown, but ultimately the decision was with Boris Johnson. So what that title tells you is that he's saying, look, I was against the second lockdown, but Boris Johnson was the one who had the decision ultimately. And, Sunak tries to defend his position by saying that, I had to focus on the economics, bro. The economics were important, despite the fact that by delaying the lockdown, things got worse and the economy was hit way harder. So, sick one, bro. Sick one. Honestly. So, So Rishi Sunak, Dishy Rishi, as I like to call him, has confirmed that he opposed the circuit breaker COVID-19 lockdown that scientific experts recommended in September as COVID began to surge, but said ultimately the decision lay with the Prime Minister. And so he's blaming Boris Johnson for not making this decision at the time. Obviously, if there were minutes of the meeting, they could have said, Sunak's lying if he, had said that he supported the circuit breaker lockdown. So that's probably the reason why he's not saying that, especially because he was one of the reasons why a second surge happened with his Eat Out to Help Out scheme. So he's not covered himself in glory during some of the pandemic. So Mr. Sunak said in cabinet he made the case against the circuit breaker due to the impact it would have on people's jobs and livelihoods, and that he believed it would be bad for the economy and long-term health as well, which we now know, which we did know for a while. That is the opposite. Had we gone into a circuit breaker, things would have been a lot better and we could have come out of lockdown earlier. So despite the government scientific advisory for SAGE recommending a lockdown in a bid to stop COVID cases increasing, Sunak said it was his job to provide the Prime Minister with the best advice in his area of expertise. But however, if he said, look, what we learned from the first lockdown is if you don't lock down early enough, then things surge and take a long time to calm down. So if we go into lockdown now, it means we can come out earlier and far quicker than if we delay the lockdown. So, that's the argument Sunak could have used, but he used the stupid, lazy argument of, I don't want to go into lockdown because it's going to affect jobs and, maybe we can just wait it out and nothing bad will happen when we had, so many people dying per day. The second wave was so much worse than the first one. So he goes to say, in the same way you'd expect the Education Secretary to feed in about this, the impact on children's education and learning, you'd expect me in my job to talk about the impact on people's jobs and livelihoods, and ultimately that things that are bad for the economy are bad for our long-term health, as well as our ability to fund things like the NHS. Obviously, he has to mention that because people care about the NHS, and he's trying to justify his position when his position was unjustifiable. And those things have got to go into a decision. These are difficult decisions to make, and it's why we weigh up those factors and why you weighed them up wrongly and got the decision wrong, and people died because of you. I covered it previously. I think it's around 27,000 people more that died because of the delay in the winter lockdown. Ridiculous. Sunak insisted that at the time it wasn't a clear-cut case, and that one of the deputy medical officers said it would not be appropriate for a national intervention, which is a very strange statement to make. However, he could have been making the case that the whole country doesn't need to go into lockdown, but certain areas did. And, Dishy Rishi may be missing that point out there, or maybe the person who typed this up missed that bit. Who knows? He continued that there was a varied epidemiology, that word, you can see it. It's, come on. Okay, let's move on now. Varied picture across the country, so a national intervention wasn't considered, one that wouldn't necessarily make sense. So, again, it's not the best argument he's making here, but of course they could have locked down more aggressively in certain areas and made sure the funding was there, so people could, self-isolate properly. Sick pay should have been higher. So, and he goes on saying, actually, Wales went down that route and it didn't, in the end, stop what needed to happen. So if we actually look at what happened with the Wales circuit breaker, so according to, Dr. Richard Stanton, he said, this is a reader in virology at Cardiff University, said there was no mystery as to why cases have increased, but the fire break was successful in reducing the level of viruses within the community, albeit temporary. He said, we know that what causes the rates to go up, and that's people being in close contact with each other. So he thinks the fire break was a success. It's very hard to argue that with the when you look at the numbers. But obviously we know that it can take time for lockdowns to actually work. So if we actually look here, the lockdown measures come force in March, so 26th of March. So if we actually look at the numbers in the 26th of March, you can see that the rolling average was about 2,000 cases, right? And it goes up. It keeps going up through April, and it only really goes under. Let's have a look at March again. So when was the lockdown announced? Sorry, 26th of March. So if we look at 26th of March, you had cases of around 7-day average of 1,754. Okay, and the next time we hit that 1,764 was around the 27th of May. So it took about 2 months. It took about 2 months for the numbers to actually come down. So lockdowns take time because obviously there's a lag. I've lost my markers for some reason because this highlighter tool decided to mess around. But we can see here, Tier 4 restrictions come into force in London and the southeast, and we can see there were multiple sort of mini lockdowns in certain areas. And if we actually look at the winter numbers, so if we see here, realistically it's the 21st of December when we saw massive amounts of lockdowns because the northeast of England was under a lockdown. So if we look here, 21st of December, and obviously we had Christmas where people could mix. You can see all throughout December, the numbers carried on piling up. And we look at January here, Prime Minister's, children can come back, and then, January 6th, the full lockdown, but we've come out of the worst of it by then. Numbers carry on rising and go down. But what we can gather from this is the fact that just because you've gone into lockdown, if you don't give it, a good few, weeks, maybe even a couple months, you will not see the effects of it, of a lockdown. But then again, the lockdowns that I've mentioned here, these were longer term. So again, it's difficult to assess how successful the Wales one was, lockdown. Perhaps he's right about the circuit breaker, but we know that's what the scientists recommended at the time. So I think Rishi is wrong in that case, but we can in this one I would let you come to your own conclusions about how successful the lockdown was in that respect. So during a visit to an engineering firm in Grimsby, Sunak said he was optimistic and confident that we're in a good position to strongly recover. The Chancellor said this was part due to the furlough scheme, which ensured millions of people had been protected that otherwise would have been lost. But obviously the point he forgets about is freelancers and the self-employed. So obviously the furlough scheme was great, it did help a lot, but at the same time it didn't his scheme didn't go far enough to help the people that really needed help. Self-employed people and freelancers should have been included, but weren't. But what's the main takeaway from this video is that Sunak is throwing his boss under the bus for not going into lockdown. He talks about it was tough weighing up decisions, and that's something you have to do as Prime Minister. But at the same time, we know that had we gone into lockdown earlier, then we wouldn't have been in as bad a position as we are in now. The economy wouldn't have taken as big a hit, and we wouldn't have had the longer lockdowns like we've had. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.